The ancient cathedral loomed before me. Its spires pierced the stormy sky. Gargoyles leered from every corner. Their stone eyes seemed to follow my every move. The massive wooden doors creaked open, revealing a cavernous interior shrouded in darkness. I stepped inside. The air was heavy with incense and age. Flickering candlelight cast long shadows that danced across weathered stone walls. Towering pillars stretched upward, disappearing into the gloom of the vaulted ceiling. The silence was oppressive, pressing down on me like a physical weight. Stained glass windows lined the walls, but little light penetrated their dusty panes. The floor was a maze of worn flagstones, each step echoing ominously in the vast space. Statues of saints and martyrs watched from shadowy alcoves. Their expressions seemed more accusing than benevolent. Suddenly, the massive doors slammed shut. The sound reverberated through the cathedral. A chill wind extinguished half the candles, plunging the space into deeper darkness, and I heard it. The sound that struck fear into hearts across the galaxy. The rhythmic, mechanical breathing. He appeared at the far end of the nave, a towering figure in black. His cape billowed behind him like wings of darkness. Each step was deliberate, purposeful. The sound of his boots on stone echoed like drumbeats, heralding the arrival of death itself. As he drew closer, details emerged from the gloom, the gleam of his helmet, the shine of his armor. He was a void given form, a black hole that consumed all light. His presence seemed to make the very air heavier. He stopped at the center of the nave, directly beneath the great rose window. For a moment he was motionless. Darth Vader stood before me in all his terrifying glory. His armor was a masterpiece of intimidation. Every line, every angle was designed to instill fear. The helmet was a featureless mask of death. Its eyes were soulless black pits. They seemed to stare into the very depths of my being. His chest plate was a complex array of lights and switches. They blinked and flickered in the gloom. The sound of his breathing filled the air. It was a constant reminder of his otherness, his inhumanity. His cape hung from his shoulders like a shroud. It seemed to absorb what little light remained. Every movement was calculated, precise. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. He exuded an aura of absolute control, of power beyond measure. His gloved hands were clenched at his sides. I could almost feel the force crackling around him. It was like standing in the presence of a god, a dark, vengeful god. The cathedral seemed to embrace Vader's presence. Its Gothic architecture perfectly complemented his menacing aura. Towering pointed arches framed his imposing figure. They drew the eye upward, emphasizing his height, his dominance. Ribbed vaults spread overhead like skeletal fingers. They seemed to reach down to grasp at the Dark Lord. Intricate stone carvings adorned every surface. Grotesque faces leered from capitals and corbels. They appeared to writhe in agony as if Vader's very presence caused them pain. Flying buttresses visible through the windows resembled massive bony wings. They added to the sense of otherworldly menace. The entire building seemed to have been designed with this moment in mind. The cathedral itself had become an extension of Vader's dark presence. A moment of stillness, then a sound like a thunderclap. Vader's lightsaber ignited. Its crimson blade cast an eerie red glow. It bathed the cathedral in blood-red light. The hum of the weapon filled the air. It drowned out even Vader's breathing. The blade seemed alive, hungry, eager to taste flesh and bone. Shadows danced wildly as Vader moved the saber. They stretched and twisted across walls and floor. The red light reflected in the polished stone. It created the illusion of rivers of blood. Flowing outward from where the Dark Lord stood, the temperature in the cathedral seemed to rise, as if the lightsaber radiated heat as well as light. The lightsaber's glow illuminated Vader in stark relief. It highlighted every menacing detail of his armor. The curves of his helmet gleamed like fresh spilled blood. He raised the saber high. Its tip scorched the air above his head. As if on cue, thunder rumbled overhead. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. Rain lashed against the stained glass windows, creating a cacophony of sound. Lightning flashed. For brief moments, it illuminated the entire cathedral, casting stark, harsh shadows that made Vader seem even more monstrous. The thunderstorm seemed to mirror Vader's mood. Each crash of thunder was like the voice of the dark side itself, speaking through its chosen agent. The wind howled around the cathedral's spires. It found its way inside through cracks and crevices, creating an eerie, whistling moan, as if the building itself was crying out in fear and pain. Water began to seep through the ancient roof. It trickled down walls and columns, creating rivulets that looked black in the red glow of the lightsaber. The dripping water added a new layer to the soundscape, a constant, maddening rhythm that underscored the thunder and Vader's breathing. The storm's fury only served to heighten the sense of menace and power emanating from the Sith Lord. Vader stood unmoved by nature's display. If anything, he seemed to draw strength from it. His cape billowed in the gusts that found their way inside. In the moments between thunderclaps, Vader's breathing dominated. It echoed off stone walls and pillars. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. It filled the cathedral like a physical presence, inescapable, omnipresent. Each inhale was a threat, each exhale a promise of doom. The rhythmic sound wormed its way into my brain. It became the backdrop to my very thoughts. The breathing was a constant reminder of Vader's otherness, of the man-machine hybrid he had become. It spoke of pain, of rage, of a life sustained by technology and hatred. In the vast space of the cathedral, the sound took on new dimensions. It became almost musical. A dark symphony of air forced through mechanical lungs. The acoustics of the building amplified and distorted the noise, creating a surround sound experience of pure terror. I found myself unconsciously trying to match my own breathing to Vader's, as if by synchronizing with him I could somehow avoid his wrath. But it was impossible. His breaths were too slow, too measured. Trying to follow them left me lightheaded, dizzy. The stained glass windows took on a new character in Vader's presence. Their colors seemed muted, drained, as if the Dark Lord's very existence leached the vibrancy from them. What little daylight filtered through was tainted. It cast sickly, distorted patterns across the floor. Saints and angels depicted in the glass looked down in silent judgment. Or was it fear? Their expressions seemed to change, to twist into masks of horror as Vader moved beneath them. Lightning flashed again. For a brief moment, the windows blazed with color. Reds and blues and greens painted Vader's armor in a riot of hues. But the effect was short-lived, as if even this burst of light and color couldn't withstand his darkness for long. In the aftermath, the shadows seemed deeper, more absolute. They clung to Vader like a second cape, writhing and shifting with each movement. The interplay of light and shadow was mesmerizing. Candlelight flickered, creating dancing patterns across polished black armor. The red glow of the lightsaber added another layer. It turned shadows blood red, made them seem alive, hungry. The overall effect was disorienting. It became difficult to judge distances. Vader began to move through the cathedral. Each step was deliberate, purposeful. He seemed to glide rather than walk, his cape billowing behind him like a shadow given form. As he passed, candles guttered and died, plunging entire sections of the vast space into darkness. It was as if the very light fled from his presence, unwilling or unable to exist in the same space as such concentrated darkness. He paused before the high altar. For a moment I thought he might kneel, but no. Darth Vader bowed to no one, not even the gods of this place. Instead, he raised his lightsaber. With a single, swift motion, he cleaved the altar in two. Stone screamed as it was split apart. The sound was like a physical blow. I staggered under its force. When the echoes faded, the message was clear. This was no longer a house of worship. It was Vader's domain now. The Dark Lord turned his attention to the statues lining the walls. With gestures so subtle I could barely perceive them, he reached out with the Force. One by one, the statues toppled. They crashed to the floor in a cacophony of breaking stone, centuries of history and artistry, destroyed in moments. In that moment, Darth Vader transcended mere physicality. He became a symbol, an avatar of darkness and power, the embodiment of every nightmare, every primal fear. He was the monster under the bed, the shadow in the corner of your eye. the voice that whispers doubts in the darkest hours of the night. All given form and substance and unleashed upon the galaxy, the Gothic Cathedral, once a place of light and hope, now served only to amplify his terrifying presence. Every arch and buttress, every carving and statue, they all seemed to point to him, to frame him, to declare his supremacy over all he surveyed.